Going to hire those black folks, those Chinese laborers, those Mexican laborers to replace you, and then you're going to get mad at the new folks they brought in instead of the boss. See, this is all divide and conquer. So white supremacy has set working class white people up to believe that they might not have much, but at least they have this. At least they have this. They have what W.E.B. Du Bois called the psychological wage of whiteness. The only problem with psychological wages is they don't pay bills. They don't pay bills. So classism has been maintained by racism and by white supremacy, by white privilege. And if we ever want to reduce and change and fundamentally abolish those severe class inequities, we're going to have to get busy dealing with this source of disunity, which is, I think, white privilege.
The gentleman in the back row. Could you stand? Thank you. Yes, sir.
The services that really are needed for people that are financially challenged or maybe people of color, and it's extremely frustrating to go to work every day. I like what I do, but it's extremely challenging because sometimes, again, to understand who really needs the help, and then we're told that, you know what, you need to do other programs, but they cost money.
Right.
And if we do that, who are we really providing services for? And then it's also amazing to me as I look around, at least from our organization in the city of Richfield, how many people aren't here. So thank you for saying all of the things that you have said.
Let me just very briefly add to that, because there's not much that I need to add to it. I appreciate you sharing that. I think that part of the reason that we keep going round and round and round in service providing organizations and sometimes feeling like we're not getting anywhere, certainly being subjected to budget cuts and budget cycles, and always feeling insecure, not knowing whether that axe is going to drop. That's a function of not having enough of a movement backing up the work that we're doing. And so instead of movement activity, we've all sort of been funneled into a professional class of service providers, which is necessary, but we got to have a movement that has our back if we're going to provide services. Otherwise, we're always vulnerable. And number two, one of the reasons that we're always having to reinvent the wheel in these service provision programs is because so little of the work, sadly, is about fundamental transformation, right? It's about giving people a lifeline so they don't sink, and not a whole lot more than that sometimes. Because we haven't really turned these into radical transformative institutions. I did community organizing in public housing in New Orleans, and it was putting Band-Aids on melanoma, man, It was not about fundamentally transforming the opportunity structure that had trapped folks in that community long before Katrina came, right? Long before Katrina came. It was about gatekeeping, right? It was about going in and I got a good and you need it. I got a service and you need it. And now we're going to see if you can get it. And it becomes a game. And good people do this work. And people who work for service providers who I know don't get paid well deserve lots of respect for the work they do. But we have to bring a different mentality to the work too and demand that the work be about transformation. There's a big difference between charity and solidarity. And there's a bigger difference between charity and justice. And a lot of social service provision has been sort of shuffled into the charitable mode, right? We're doing for, not with. There's a big difference. If I'm doing for you and not with you, I'm not about your liberation and not about my own liberation. I'm about a check and a service and maybe a little bit of uplift, but not transforming. And so we have to have a different rhetoric. Those of us who work for such organizations or work for them, and if we're not working for them, we still have to demand better when we talk about service provision. Because otherwise, it sometimes, I think, gets weakened. And we all know it does. And even those of us in the work, we want it to be something else, but we don't quite know how to do it. We've got to start demanding that rhetoric be changed and really be about fundamental change. And I think when it becomes about that, it gets people excited. It gets those who are being served excited and active as agents of their own liberation, whereas sometimes service provision, when it gets into a whole charitable mode, it's very passive, right? And it doesn't really help activate the community because they know it's not about that. And then they get despondent, and then we get despondent, and then the whole cycle of despondency just sort of is maintained, and we're all sort of cynical about what's going to happen. We got to get people energized. We do that by talking about fundamentally changing the community and the dynamics in the community. It's a long-term struggle. We got to do. Other questions?
Okay. This young lady right here. Could you stand, please? And reach the mic. Yes, ma'am. With the bangs? Yeah, please. And the mic's right behind you.
Good morning. I have a question. I don't necessarily think that diversity is the best word to use, but I have the opportunity to bring diversity training to my agency. Advertising something and getting people to come, I think, is a big part of it. But in your opinion, once I get the people there, how do I make that training as valuable as possible? How do I get them to come out of that training with a different state of mind?
I think training's, I mean, it's sort of simple, but it's sort of complicated too. It's simple in the sense that, I mean, every time I've seen these kind of things work, it's always the same dynamic that makes it work. Number one is that it's facilitated by someone who's skilled at doing the facilitation, who knows how to facilitate when people try to divert the conversation, change the subject, get defensive, who know how to work with defensiveness. That takes some skill. It's hard, you know, when someone gets defensive or gets sort of pissy with you and you want to sort of get pissy back, and you got to be good at not doing that. It's a real cultivated skill. Number two, it has to be a conversation that allows individuals who are defensive or, you know, feeling guilty about the conversation or feeling angry or hurt to express that, to know that that emotion is going to be valued enough to be heard, but then that it's also going to be challenged, hopefully in a compassionate way, but that it will be challenged. And then finally, I think you have to have the conversation when you're talking about something like privilege or equalizing power dynamics. Those who have the power right now, in order to really stay in that conversation, have to understand the stake that that equity has for them. It would be nice if people would just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, but that's not the culture we live in. And if we want to get to that culture, we have to get people involved in the conversation. And they won't typically get involved in the conversation out of some altruistic or simply need to just do the right thing so that we're on the cause of justice. I want white folks, for example, to think about what white privilege and inequality does to us, how it compromises our humanity, how it puts us in a box and limits our options as white people. I want men to think about how sexism and patriarchal relations limit us as men and diminish our ability to express ourselves as men in a multitude of ways. And we all know how it does this, right, on a gender level. Just to mention that real quickly, like as a man, I'm supposed to express emotion a particular way or not at all. If I venture outside that box that patriarchy has created for me, patriarchy created that box for me, sexism created that box for me. If I venture outside that box, all of a sudden I'm not a real man anymore. Now my humanity is questioned, my manhood is questioned, so I got to play a game. It's a game where if I come and hug, I know some of the men in this room, if I come and give you a hug afterward, and I'm not really planning on it, by the way, y'all, but if I were to come and give any of the men in this room a hug, you know what that box of manhood says I got to do. I got to hit you on the back hard. I gotta come at you like I'm trying to beat your spine through your chest to demonstrate what a man I am. Right? Because that's the I'm heterosexual pact that we do, you know? It's that, no, I'm straight, really, I'm straight. And men do that with each other, right? Even gay male friends of mine feel they got to do that when they're not out, you know, that's deep, right? But if I come and hug any of the women, and I know many of the women in the room, if I give any of y'all hugs, see, I won't do that pact thing. I'll just come give you a nice, warm, cozy little hug because I can, see? That's a box, I hate that. That's not healthy, I want to be in that space, but that's where we are. So I want us to think about that. I want us to think about how we're limited, because if I am able to get somebody to think about how racism hurts white folks, and I talk about that in the book, the whole last chapter's about that. If I talk about how sexism hurts men, how straight supremacy hurts heterosexuals, how classism even hurts people with well, not the really rich, but, you know, it definitely hurts middle class, and even upper middle, it definitely hurts middle class people, because middle class people are always trying to reach for something above them and always on a treadmill and trying to get more and more and more because the class system says they got to, and it's really unhealthy stuff. And actually, the class system is bad for rich people too, in a weird way. Like the kids of really wealthy affluent people. There's a great book right now called The Price of Privilege that every parent in this room ought to read, particularly every white parent or every parent who's affluent regardless of race. And Madeline Levine, who wrote the book, talks about the fact that right now the kids in this country that are expressing the greatest level of parental alienation, the greatest level of depression, the greatest level of substance abuse disorders, the greatest level of other psychological dysfunctions, things like eating disorders, self-mutilation, and self-injury. You know who those kids are? They're white and they're affluent, right? And these are kids who have everything in the sense they got